Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Lens with me, Parikshit Luthra. India has overtaken Japan to become the world's fourth largest economy, with GDP estimated at over $4 trillion, according to the government. It now projects India will surpass Germany within the next 3 years, taking the economy to $7.3 trillion. The government says growth momentum has surprised on the upside, with GDP hitting a six-quarter high in Q2 of FY26. India's long-term ambition is to achieve high middle-income status by 2047, the centenary year of its independence. The World Bank says this will require an average growth rate of 7.8% over the next 22 years to hit that goal. For now, the numbers remain strong. Real GDP grew 8.2% in Q2, 7.8% in the previous quarter, and 7.4% in Q4 of FY25. Reflecting this momentum, the RBI has raised its FY26 growth forecast to 7.3% from 6.8% earlier. But with the union budget just around the corner, how can the government turbocharge growth? Indian industry is calling for smoother supply chains, sustained government capital expenditure on infrastructure, simpler and more rational tax structures, and targeted support for MSMEs. But will that be enough for India to sustain near 8% growth for the next 2 decades to meet its 2047 ambitions? And what tough reforms will it take to get there? Joining us now to take the discussion forward is economist and former IMF Executive Director Surjit Bhalla. Mr. Bhalla, thank you very much for being with us here on Global Lens. Let me begin by asking you, we saw more than 10 major reforms in 2025. The Prime Minister, in a very recent meeting with top economists in the country at the Niti Aayog, said that the focus now must be on greater self-reliance and structural transformation. What are some of the structural reforms do you think that India must deliver in 2026?
Okay, the outline is for the next 20 years. And you mentioned that we need to grow at 7.8% for 20 years in order to achieve the target. Now, what reforms are necessary? I think fairly good reforms have occurred on the income taxation side. And I don't think much more is needed in that direction, whether personal income tax or the corporate income tax, which was reformed in 2019, or GST. So what is needed? So what ails? So let me put it this way. What ails the Indian economy is investment. And investment, both private as well as FDI coming from abroad, those are the two areas which really have to do with our economy being more open. If we do not become more open, I think 7.8% or even 7% for 20 years is a pipe dream.
That's an important point, sir, because the gross inward FDI was marginally up at $58.3 billion during April to October period, up from $50.5 billion a year ago period. Net FDI was negative for the third straight month in October 2025 as inflows fell and outflows grew. Do you see this changing at all in 2026? And when you say that if we don't open up, the 7.8% growth rate for the next 20 years is going to be a pipe dream, how exactly do we need to open up? What are the barriers we need to drop?
Okay. So first, to understand what has happened to FDI, okay? Basically, our net FDI, the government can come out and cite figures. We've got $80 billion and so on and so forth. That's for the birds. In other words, what is most important is net FDI, the money that comes in, subtract the money that goes out. And from India, the money going out is now larger than the money coming in, as you just suggested. So what needs to be done? Now, we have to go back to 2015, when the government announced that from now on and henceforth, foreign investment, which basically entails a foreign unit, a foreign firm collaborating with an Indian firm. So we are not talking about portfolio investments. That's yet another story. We are talking about foreign direct investment, which involves both a foreign firm and a domestic firm. That number, the net FDI, has been hovering around 2% for the last 15, 20 years. But in 2015, the government said from now on, any disputes between the two firms, and that can happen, divorces happen all the time, also amongst firms, that any dispute between the two firms will have to be settled in an Indian court. Now, as I've been saying this for the last few years, even Indians don't trust an Indian court. So why are you expecting, why is the government expecting that foreign firms will settle for a decision by an Indian court? Actually, you can trace it. This policy came into effect in 2015. We continued to have net FDI as 2% of GDP, approximately, give or take, for the next several years. Why did that happen? That happened because FDI contracts, agreements, are for about 10 years or more, or give or take a couple of years. So 2015, the new ruling came in. The old foreign agreements still continued until most of them had expired by 2021, which is when net FDI in India collapsed. And that is what, or maybe it was 22. So it's a very simple, straightforward decision by the government to reverse, or at least put in cold storage and get back to what we had before 2015, put in cold storage the new law. Second, and related to this, is a trade agreement with the US. And that, as you know, we've been dilly-dallying. Sometimes we say we are very close to a deal. And really, I think investors, both portfolio investors as well as other investors, have given up hope that there will be a substantial trade deal with the US.
Right.
If you don't have a substantial trade deal with the US, who are you going to have a trade deal with? Recently, it was announced that with New Zealand, we had a trade deal, a fantastic trade deal, and the government said that exports will double over the next 5 years. Okay, that's very good. Doubling is a 14% rate of growth per year. However, the levels of our Indian exports to New Zealand were 0.8 billion in right now. So it'll double to 1.6 billion, which isn't even a drop in the ocean.
Mr. Bhalla, if I were to ask you about the India-US deal, you touched upon a very important point which has been concerning foreign investors, foreign portfolio investors, and even Indian exporters. There is no clarity as to by when we'll have this deal. We've already given a proposal, negotiations are over. Donald Trump has to sign it. Now, how critical is it for India to get this deal in order to achieve our Viksit Bharat dreams? And can we live without a trade deal with the United States?
Okay, simple answer. A trade deal, and a meaningful trade deal with the US, not a wishy-washy trade deal, which is a trade deal only in name, is absolutely necessary for Viksit Bharat. Let me emphasize that. It's absolutely necessary. And I believe the consequences of a meaningful trade deal with the US will put in motion several policies, etc., including deregulation, which the government has been rightfully talking about, all of this will come to be, and I think we've got a very good shot at Viksit Bharat in 2047. So, in other words, a meaningful trade deal with the US will put in motion policy changes, and that will get us to Viksit Bharat, a very good chance. Now, remember, world growth is going to decline, is declining, though in this year, the world growth is slightly higher than last year. And maybe for another couple of years, that will be the case. But we're moving into an ultra competitive world environment, whether you bring in AI or anything else. And in this competitive world environment, everybody is going to try and get to improve their exports. And here we are basically with one of the lowest exports to GDP ratio. And, for us to then think that we can do it without a trade deal, as I said, is a pipe dream.
Right. You spoke about exports. I'd also like to ask you about manufacturing share in our GDP. What do you think has been achieved with the PLI schemes so far? And what do we now need to do in order to probably increase the share of manufacturing in our GDP? Do you think the budget could deliver a booster shot?
I hope so. Look, the PLI scheme was, maybe meaningful when it started, but really, why do we need, we've been talking about PLI schemes, self-reliance. I don't think any country achieved Viksit by self-reliance, by definition. Okay? You have to be open, non-self-reliant in order to grow fast. So therefore, I think the PLI was a halfway house, maybe favoring some firms, maybe not. But really, I think we need, I'll give you an example. Look at software, okay? Anything that the government does not control has been doing fantastically well. You haven't asked me a single question about services, and services are doing very, very well. So that's the question we should ask. How is it that services are doing very well and anything the government is involved in is doing terribly badly? And that gets me back to the trade deal with the US. If we have a trade deal with the US, the role of the government will go down substantially, and thank God for that.
That's an important point again. In your articles also, you've spoken about the importance of deregulation and how deregulation could be a big theme that the government could achieve and show progress on in 2026. You spoke about how services have grown. Which are the other areas where you feel that the government must move out of and let the market forces play?
I think one of the most tragic things to happen regarding Indian reforms was the non-passage of the farm laws back in 2022. That is another area. I think that was a significant step forward, and we went back to where we were, if not a couple of steps behind. So I think agriculture needs to be reformed. And the farm laws are a perfect blueprint for that. So the government doesn't have to think again. All it has to do is to make the market more open. Second, for the farmers. Second, I think we have to get away from the massive amount of food subsidies. Remember, the food subsidies and the PDS and all the rest of it came into being in 1978. That's 50 years ago. And we are still following the same policies. The world has changed, India has changed, and we are going back to where the policies were in 78. So I think agriculture has to be a major, and some good progress has been made in agriculture. Actually, the farmers themselves are moving into animal husbandry and non-traditional farming output. But why can't we open up the farming sector? And we are in the trade deals, we keep saying we have red lines. We have red lines in agriculture. We have red lines in dairy. I mean, what are the non-red lines that we have? So I think, the government needs to, it has done several good things. As I said, the tax reforms are a major step forward. But I think this last bit, the last mile, has to be traveled. And I think it's even more urgent today, given all the rules and given the turmoil that the world trading system is going through.
Right.
And
Mr.
it's
Bhalla,
not another point I want to make is then, we putting our heart into, oh, the BRICS will save us, or China will save us, or the Russia will save, or exports to China will save us, or exports to Russia, etc., or BRICS. This is, this is not sound policy. Sound policy is you get the country to be a lot more open, and part of the passage for the country to be a lot more open is a trade deal with the US.
right. You've also written about how we need to focus on creating steady and constructive investments. In that context, what role do you see for the RBI and RBI interventions this year at a time when we have seen rupee under stress and at record lows?
I happen to think that the RBI over the last 6 months or 9 months or so, since Malhotra became the RBI governor, I don't find any fault with the RBI except for, and this is not a fault, but this is my hope that it will not be a fault. Look, the RBI, the lot of studies have confirmed that for a country like India, developing country, to grow, that the real policy rate should be close to 1%. For developed economies, it should be close to 0%, like the US. For countries like India, it should be close to 1%. Right now, the real policy rate is somewhere 3%. So I think the RBI governor has been on a path of reducing the policy rate, and I think he should do it significantly faster over the next 6 to 12 months. So, in other words, our monetary policy will be in the right direction for Viksit Bharat. A
Right.
real policy rate no more than 1%.
Right. And I'll just put my one final question to you, sir. What is that probably one message do you want to see in the union budget which you feel will unleash investments and create a better investment climate? You've given us the importance of the trade deal, the importance of measures that the RBI can take. But beyond that, any message that the finance minister could deliver?
I think the message, my one message would be, we need to think as to why is our own investors, and the finance minister has been saying all the time correctly, why aren't the Indian corporates investing more in India and investing more outside? Okay. So, in other words, we need more private investment in India. Now, I don't think asking firms to invest more is going to do anything. It's policies that matter. So the one message to the government would be, think, why is it that Indian corporates are investing a lot more abroad than they are in India? Alternatively, why aren't Indian corporates investing more in India? That's the one. Answer that question, and we will be on the road.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhalla, for joining us with that very comprehensive overview at the start of 2026. to see what the government can deliver, what are some of the gaps in our system after a very strong reform push in 2025. Let's see what message the Finance Minister delivers with the Union budget later this year on the 1st of February. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. We're taking a short break, but don't go anywhere. We get you more global stories on the other side. India and Pakistan have once again exchanged lists of nuclear installations that cannot be targeted during hostilities. A 35-year-old tradition observed every 1st of January. Signed in 1988 and in force since 1991, the pact has survived Kargil, multiple standoffs and diplomatic tensions. The timing is notable, coming just days after Operation Sindoor and a rare India-Pakistan interaction in Dhaka. Both sides also exchanged lists of civilian prisoners and fishermen in each other's custody. India shared details of 391 civilian prisoners and 33 fishermen believed to be Pakistani, while Pakistan listed 58 civilian prisoners and 199 fishermen believed to be Indian. India has urged Pakistan to expedite the release and repatriation of 167 Indian prisoners and fishermen who have completed their sentences, and to provide immediate consular access to 35 Indians still awaiting it. US President Donald Trump has dismissed concerns about his health in an interview with the Wall Street Journal. Responding sharply to questions about his age and fitness, 79-year-old Trump has brushed off scrutiny over reports of drowsiness during public events and visible bruising on his hand, saying he was tired of repeated questions about his health. If Trump completes his second term, he would become the oldest sitting president in US history, surpassing his predecessor, Joe Biden. Fighting has broken out between forces backed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in Yemen. The clashes are taking place at the areas bordering Saudi Arabia. This development comes just days after Saudi and the Yemen government accused the UAE of arming rebels in a southern province. Saudis carried out a bombing campaign targeting rebel forces a few days ago. Unrest in Iran continues to intensify as protests enter the 5th day. Reports have said that at least 7 people have been killed in clashes between demonstrators and security forces. Vehicles were set ablaze and many demonstrators were heard chanting slogans against the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Some also called for restoration of the monarchy. These protests were triggered by sharp collapse in the national currency. President Trump has warned Iran that US will intervene if authorities continue to kill protesters. In a short post on social media, Trump said, and I quote, "We are locked and loaded and ready to go." He gave no further details. Russia's defense ministry says it has handed evidence to a US military attaché that shows Ukraine targeted Russian presidential residence this week. Moscow is accusing Kyiv of launching 91 long-range drones at a residence of President Vladimir Putin in the Novgorod region. Here's a report on the exchange between both nations.
A senior Russian military chief handed over what he said was part of a Ukrainian drone to a US military attaché on Thursday. He said the drone part contained data that proved the Ukrainian military had targeted a Russian presidential residence earlier this week. Moscow accused Kiev on Monday of sending 91 long-range drones to try and strike a residence of President Vladimir Putin in Russia's northern Novgorod region. Russia said it would review its negotiating position in ongoing talks with the US on ending the Ukraine war. Ukraine and Western nations have disputed Russia's version of events. The Wall Street Journal reported on Wednesday that US officials had found Ukraine did not target Putin or one of his residences in a drone strike. Reuters could not immediately verify the report.
President Putin told me about it.
US President Donald Trump initially expressed sympathy for Russia's charge, saying Putin informed him and he was very angry. But by Wednesday, Trump appeared more skeptical, sharing on social media a New York Post editorial accusing Russia of blocking peace in Ukraine. Kiev denies carrying out the attack, saying it's a Russian ploy to strain ties with Washington after Trump's meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Chinese EV maker BYD is all set to overtake Tesla for the first time in annual sales. BYD sold more than 2.25 million vehicles in 2025. Tesla is due to report sales numbers, with analysts expecting that company to have sold 1.65 million vehicles last year. However, BYD is likely to face growing pressure in the coming year as China scales back some incentives supporting EV purchases. The United States believes China's military drills in Taiwan has unnecessarily increased tensions in the region. The State Department urged Beijing to exercise restraint and cease its military pressure on Taiwan. This comes as the Taiwanese president vowed to defend the country's sovereignty after China allegedly fired rockets towards the island as part of military drills. At least 40 people were killed and 100 people were injured in a blaze in a bar at a ski resort as partygoers celebrated the arrival of the new year. Swiss police have begun the process of identifying victims, which they say could take several days given the severity of burns. Eyewitness accounts suggest the fire could have been caused by waitresses carrying champagne bottles with flares and candles on top of them. That's a wrap on another edition of Global Lens. Goodbye and many thanks for watching.